welcome to Creative Collaborations. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Paula Fan has put together a panel of amazing women. They have some interesting life experiences to share with all of us, so thank you for joining us. My name is Jamie Manser. I'm the Communications and Events Coordinator for the Confluencenter for Creative Inquiry. If you are not familiar with the Confluencenter, we're the organization that provides the logistical support for creative collaborations. We are also a U of A research unit. We provide faculty collaboration grants and we offer fellowships to graduate students. We have some events coming up that will highlight some of the research we have funded over the last several years. On Wednesday, April 15th, 3 of our student researchers are presenting the work they've done over the last year for our monthly show and tell event. That event takes place downtown at the Playground Bar and Lounge, and it starts at 6 p.m. On Tuesday, April 21st, we are hosting a showcase of the work our funding has allowed faculty researchers to achieve over the last 5 years. The showcase is taking place on campus at the Student Union Ballroom from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Finally, the center is bringing in sports psychologist, meditation teacher, and motivational speaker George Mumford for several talks on Wednesday, April 8th. If you are familiar with the NBA or a fan of the NBA, you may remember George Mumford for his work with the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers during their championship seasons in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He helped the players go to 11 NBA championships through meditation practices. For more information on these events and everything else we have going on, please visit our website at confluencenter.arizona.edu. And thank you for coming.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. We in the arts can sometimes be rather insular. We've got our noses down practicing. And really, in the arts, in music in particular, you're rarely going to find a man singing soprano. I have yet to hear that happen, any man singing violetta or anything like that. But the women's movement was sort of nailed into me when I auditioned, finally, for an orchestral job. And I realized before I walked on stage that there was a screen there, so that they couldn't see who I was. And more importantly, there was a carpet, so they couldn't hear whether I was wearing heels or not. And so from being sort of in and out of awareness of the women's movement, it all came home to roost. In celebration of this month, Women's History Month, we are featuring the voices of women, poetry by women, a song cycle by one of our most famous composers, just composers, of modern American song, and the voices of 3 women who were there and have lots to share about how things were once upon a time, what happened in the interim, where we are now, and how far we have yet to go. We'd like to start with a song.
It's the water
would hear the street lamps spin into miniature suns against a feathery sky.
Ladies, so when you were growing up, what did you think you were going to do? What did you aspire to? Did you dream about something? What made you aware of what you could do? I'd like to introduce Linda Grant, Susan Freund, Marilyn Hines, and of course my singer, Krista Doberman. Go for it.
Who do you want to go first?
Pick it. Let's go.
I always wanted to be a journalist. I did feel I was breaking barriers. Can you hear me? But I had no idea how difficult it was going to be. I became quite aware quite young. My father, who was an executive with a Fortune 50 company, had a fascinating life, traveling 6 months of the year, circling the globe, and back when that was exotic. And my mother was kind of a 1950s bore, really. And so I decided to take my dad's route, and I was editor of my high school paper and earned a BS in journalism, and started to work my way up.
I grew up with a family business, optical business, that is still in business from the 1898. It was started with my grandfather and great uncle. And so I always knew I was destined to, until I got married and had children, of course, to be in the optical business. So I never really thought about doing much of anything other than going to school, going to college, and then coming back home to be in the optical business. It wasn't until actually I graduated from college that I started taking a different path, much to my family's, major disappointment. At that time, I did have a degree in economics and accounting, and I not only didn't go back home to join the optical business, but I went to work for the IRS. Disowned.
Well, I was very lucky and blessed because I picked the right parents. Can you hear me, by the way?
No.
I'll talk louder. I was very lucky and blessed because I picked the right parents. But my mother worked as a commercial artist, but I knew that other mothers did not work. My father was very encouraging. The day after my 6th birthday, he would say to me, "Big girl like you, you're almost 7 years old, you can do it." It was that sort of encouragement. Both parents valued education. At about 14 or 15, I decided to become a doctor. I'd read a book about a psychiatrist, and that sounded very interesting. No Google in those days, so I went to the library to look up how did you become a psychiatrist. Have to go to medical school first. Okay, I'll go. But I think I was lucky to have the parents to give me the courage to even do that.
Did you feel you were breaking barriers?
Oh, by the end, yes. Getting through college was a cinch. But once I went to New York City after I graduated to get a job, I was met with derision, hostility, laughter, insults, and I really had to fight the whole time. We were really pre-feminists, those of us who were trying to get jobs in the 1960s. And, only 10% of women were doctors. Doctors were women. And 3% lawyers. And there were very few women in the working world. And I think that we all had a fear that we would lose our jobs if we tried to fight harder to be promoted, and we lacked confidence. These were some serious problems that we had to deal with. At Fortune magazine, where I ended up retiring in 1998 as a senior writer, there was a strict gender-based policy. Men were writers, women were fact checkers and reporters. And this struck me as arrogant and wrong. And the women started to file complaints. Now these were journalists all over New York with various magazines. They started to file complaints with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. These were based on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and they alleged that they were prohibited from promotions strictly on the basis of gender. There was a prolonged and bloody fight, which has been documented in a book by Lynn Povich called The Good Girls Revolt, How the Women of Newsweek Sued Their Bosses and Changed the Workplace. I was part of that fight. Newsweek women, one of the little anecdotes was that Newsweek women hired a prominent black woman lawyer called Eleanor Holmes Norton, who was quite large and exceedingly pregnant. And she warned the women before a meeting with the men editors, ladies, you're going to have to take off your white gloves. They did, and throughout the profession, the women began to win victories. As part of the settlements, publications were forced to institute writer training programs for women. The men at Fortune hated this, and year after year they flunked all the women who were in training. I think that's funny, huh? In the mid-1970s, I was selected to be put to the test. Now, pretty much everyone on the staff thought it was going to be a slam dunk for me because I had freelanced for other publications. I'd been writing at Fortune for years. I just wasn't getting the promotion and the pay of a writer. But after a year, the editors flunked me as well. This was such an unfair decision that it ended Fortune's writing program forever. I wrote a strong letter of protest and took a leave of absence. About 6 months later, I came back, and guess what? I was made a writer. This was a huge victory for all women. Within the year, I celebrated by quitting Fortune and joining the Los Angeles Times in LA. The Times welcomed me with open arms and promoted me as frequently as they could. It felt really, really good after 2 decades of punishing struggle. And I won several major awards while I worked my way up to assistant business editor. That's my story.
When I did graduate from college, I had studied economics and accounting, and my accounting professor came to me and he said, "You are probably the best student I have ever had." And I was the only female in any of those classes. And he said, "But there's a problem. You will not be able to get a job unless it's with the government." I think that was the first time I realized that just by getting good grades, that wasn't going to be enough. Because always, you know, when you're in school, you get the good grades, you do manage to get the National Honor Society or whatever it is. So he said, you have 2 choices. Either go with the IRS or with the General Accountability Office. So I went with the IRS, and at the time I understood, I was an agent in the Newark office. I had been told that there were only 4 female agents in the whole United States when I was hired. So it was quite unusual, but I didn't feel any animosity from my coworkers or the people above me. It really was a very good experience. With working with the IRS, I had an exposure to tax law, and I fell in love with it. Just absolutely fell in love with it. It used to be logical back then. It is not anymore. Back then, it was logical. I still have my first Internal Revenue Code. It's only about that thick. It's got great big print that I can still read with my eyes today. That's not the way it is anymore. Anyhow, I fell in love with tax law, but this was 1967 when I didn't go to law school. So I didn't even really think about it. And I'll wait till Paula asks the next question and add on to that.
Well, there were barriers, and there still are, which we'll get to later. However, there's other things that were lacking. Role models, mentors. You were sort of out there, at least in medical school, on your own. One example that I can give is numbers. For example, the year I entered medical school, and I didn't know this until the 70s. I entered medical school in 1951. The year that I entered, fewer than 400 women in the entire country did so. Today, it's over 20,000 women entering medical school each year. And I have to confess, I said earlier that I found the courage to do this on my own from my background, but I have to confess that if I had known what a pioneer I was, I might have been too frightened to go, but I assumed that I could do it. And it was not an easy road. Let me say one other thing about mentor. My last year in medical school, which was in 1954, I knew that I knew as much medicine as my classmates, but suddenly I was in a state of panic. I don't know anything about how a woman doctor manages. What if she wants to get married? What if she wants to have children? And this really disturbed me because I thought, am I on the wrong path? And there was a married couple at the hospital. They both worked as physicians. They had 2 small children. And I somehow found, the courage and maybe the chutzpah to invite myself over to see their house, to actually see how they did it. The woman doctor, who was an infectious disease fellow, it could not have been easy for her to make dinner for her family and myself and to play with her children after a hard day's work, but she did it. And watching her for those 2 hours, I really learned something. I learned that there was a way of doing this. All sorts of different ways, actually. But the point is that if you don't have that image of how it's done, if you don't have the image of the role model, then it's more difficult.
Before you break your heart,
What did you find out there? And did you consider yourselves to be feminists during your journey? Did you consider yourselves to be part of the movement?
This isn't the question you gave us.
That's right. This is what imagination's all about. I'm an artist.
Yeah, of course, one considered oneself a feminist. I didn't agree with everything that the movement was doing. I felt burning bras was silly. A lot of the when MS magazine came out and said, should we shave our legs? I did not think this was a big issue because I was really interested in equal pay. So I consider myself a feminist, but I never really, I would never have joined a feminist group. I did, however, mentor younger women. The women who, in journalism, the few that had made it as writers, were of no help to those of us trying to get there. They loved having exclusive access to the editors and really cut us pretty dead, who were trying to get into the club. I mentored younger people, but I always told them, just keep your eye on the ball and do the job and work hard and forget about all this other stuff.
Attitudes. It took about 7 years, and I realized I could go to law school because attitudes had changed. Women were being admitted, and the year I was admitted, and this is cute, there is a dear mother of a friend that I started law school with in 1974, and we are still friends, and I saw her mother the minute she walked in today. When I started law school in 1974, their law school was 3 years. The third-year law students, about 10% were women. Second-year law students, it was about 20–25%. Third-year law students, we hit a third of the class. It's now, of course, around 50. The attitudes, not so good with many of the professors. I think they thought game on. We actually ended up with a couple of marriages and a couple of refusals by the women. So the attitudes weren't especially 100% the way they should have been. There were some professors that were encouraging. The year that I started, the U of A Law School hired the first female woman professor. She was really treated badly, and we all knew it. I would say my classmates were great, male and female. It was just on the cusp, I think, of when things were really beginning to change. I think most of us, I didn't burn the bra, I just gave up on it. Where we, I don't think we were obnoxious, but we were, I think, having to fight for what we wanted. And as Linda said, focusing on the money, focusing on the education was where I think it really came about, not so much focusing on what might have been considered annex.
Well, the original question was, what attitudes greeted your entry into higher education? And I want to illustrate the attitudes that hit me in the face. One in 1947, when I entered college, the dean at Radcliffe, at a after supper, we had something called gracious living. After we ate in the dining room, we then went to the living room where the house mother, she was still called that, poured the coffee. The dean was there to talk to us on our first night, and she said that, and I'm quoting her as close as I can remember, "You are here to become educated mothers for your children." Oops. And I had a little bit of cognitive dissonance because I thought I was there on the first step of my road to becoming a doctor, but I didn't say anything. You see, I can call myself a feminist now, but when I look back and put myself into that actually, I entered college early, and I wasn't quite 17. I turned 17 in 1 week. But I was young, and it never occurred to me to raise my hand and say, hey, wait a minute. That came much later. Another statement in medical school, 1954, I'll set the stage for you. It's the first day of my obstetrics gynecology rotation, and the head of the department greeted us in the amphitheater. You know what they all look like. I was sitting in the front row because I was an eager student, and he said, with apologies to the young women studying medicine, the function of young women is to have babies. Well, I took notes, you know, I was scribbling because it might be on the exam. Who knew? But the point is that at that point in time, I took notes. I didn't think about it. When did I think about it? In the late 60s. I was walking down a street, and my consciousness had been raised by the women's movement. I mean, I was interested in all of the other areas in which women were struggling to achieve, and I was interested in some of the attitudes that were changing, and they changed so quickly in the 60s. The way we thought changed in that short 10 years about blacks, about women. But anyway, the remark that this professor had made went up into my consciousness, and I was enraged. If I had seen him walking down the street, I probably would have kicked him. I called it my moment of retroactive consciousness raising. So attitudes have definitely changed since those times.
Beauty hurts. Sisters as beauty hurts. Yanking a hank of my lanky hair, yanking a hank of my lanky hair, yanking a hank of my lanky hair around the lap of wire mesh rollers, whose inside bristles prick my scalp like so many pins. Beauty hurts. Big sister says beauty hurts. She says I'd better sleep with them in. She plucks, tweezes, glides, razor blades over tender armpit skin, slathers downy legs with stinking depilatory cream, presses straight lashes, bolt upright with a medieval-looking padded clamp. Looking good hurts. It's hard work. She plucks, tweezes, glides, razor blades over tender armpit skin. She plucks, tweezes, presses straight lashes, bolts upright. Beauty hurts. Looking good hurts. Rollers, tweezers, razor blades. Beauty hurts.
We're women. We're supposed to look nice. We're supposed to do other things. So what about the other life, your relationships, you have families, children, and how did you manage?
That's the real crux of this whole issue. But I did not want a family when I was young, because I was before I was professionally set, because I had felt that I would have no chance of ever getting anywhere. I knew a child would destroy any chances that I would have of getting a job. So I did not, until I was the age of 43, after 2 marriages, become pregnant, and I had a son. And I quit working for 7 years to be with him. It was absolutely a joyous time. He is now a lawyer in Philadelphia and has his wife is an emergency room doctor. They have a 1-year-old daughter. They split all their household duties 50-50, and it was pretty wonderful. What I did was worked at home. I mean, I just stayed at home with him for 7 years, and then when I went back to work, I worked at home. Technology was helping me out here because we had the computers by then. And I worked out of my home in the suburbs of New York until he was old enough for me to commute back and forth to New York. And that's my story. I thought families were something to be very, very afraid of, when I was young.
How about relationships? The men in your life, what do they think
How much
about
time-
you?
How much time do you have? Well, with the usual ups and downs, journalists aren't very stable romantically, and so I was no different. All I could manage on my own in the 1960s when I was starting out was to become a researcher with Newsweek magazine, but I was dating the highest ranking editor who was a bachelor, and he was ordered to Vietnam, and so he asked me to come with him. And he said, if these men won't give you jobs, I'll do the blocking and tackling for you. So he was as good as his word. I freelanced under his tutelage and ended up writing 2 cover stories for the New York Times Sunday magazine, one of which won an Overseas Press Club Award in 1967. He made me rewrite every story about 5 times. These are 5,000-word stories. But they were my stories, and I learned how to write from him by observing the best journalists in the nation who were in Vietnam at that time. So he was a great assist. My second husband wasn't such a helpful guy. He turned out to be an alcoholic. So after I got rid of him and raised my son, I was a single mom.
Okay, relationships. They're tough, I think, under any circumstances when you're in law school and working as a lawyer 80 hours a week. They're just not going to go very well. So, like Linda, I've had my ups and downs over the years. The children, I also, like Linda, figured I wanted a career. There wasn't room for children. I can look back to most of the women that I worked with in Washington, D.C., my good friends, many of my law school friends, they never did have children. It was just, they may have gotten married a few times, but most of them never tried to juggle with the children. And I was content with that till my brother had a child. And I thought, and still think, she is the most marvelous creature I have ever met. That changed my attitude. I had 2 boys. I was age 35 and 38. When I was 35 and had was pregnant with the first child, I was with a very large law firm in Washington, D.C. that is now part of Pillsbury Madison. There was no such thing as maternity leave. No fool female attorney had ever become pregnant in the history of the law firm, other than moi. So, I went out, I was back in 3.5 weeks and pretended like nothing had happened. The second child, I went into premature labor, had to go on bed rest, and I wish I had kept the letter that said, "You are now fired." Which of course you can't do nowadays. So I guess we've come a little ways, but you know, the whole family children thing was very hard, and I think we, the people in the 60s and the 70s were really on the forefront as far as trying to make it happen, if that's what you want.
Okay, let me take you back again to the 40s and 50s when I grew up. These were the Dick and Jane days. Mother with the apron who stayed home, father with a briefcase who went to work, Dick, Jane, Spot and Puff, I believe. But anyway, things were very different then. And the message that I got from society as I was growing up was, if you don't get married and have children, there's something wrong with you. We used the word old maid at that time. It was pejorative. Now, interestingly enough, my daughter, who's also a physician, said to me when she heard me talk and mention that this must have been maybe 15 years ago, and she said, "You know, Mom, the message is still there, but it's not as loud." And I thought, you know, I have to watch for this because this could be a problem. In 1958, remember I told you that I was a pioneer because so few women entered medical school the year I did. I met my husband in 1958, and actually, as I look back, he was the real pioneer because that was Donna Reed was the mother of role model at that time, and I was nothing like her. However, we wanted children. We had 2 children. I raised 2 stepsons, and we managed to do it. The interesting thing is that I could not have done it without a job in which I had sufficient money to pay for help, that's a biggie, and a husband that was willing to share child care duties with me. He always bathed the kids at night, for example. So I was lucky. But I do think that, I forgot to tell you, the best thing my husband did was when I got a job offer in Tucson, he said, "Okay, let's move to Tucson," and sold his veterinary hospital, and we moved to Tucson. So the dual career conflict, which is another problem with professional women, when someone gets a job offer, what do you do with the other one? For me, he solved the dual career conflict. I think there are still problems in whether or not to have children and in who's going to take care of the children. We actually live in a nation where it seems to me every policymaker still thinks that women are at home like Dick and Jane's mom, and that's not the case. So I think there's a big issue about our commitment to child care for everybody.
vanish and bloom. The end of my third month without
Now, what have you accomplished? What have we accomplished? What have women accomplished? And what's yet to be done?
Well, a tremendous amount's been accomplished. This is like trying to judge the civil rights movement or any social upheaval, such as the women's movement. Women are now everywhere. Salaries and corporate promotions are inching up, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But there is still so much to do. We need flexibility in the workplace. That's really key. Maternity leaves should be mandatory. That should be a national law. I think we're the only country in the civilized country, maybe not so civilized, in the world that doesn't have that. Paternal leave should be optional, and there should be much more support with quality daycare for people who have to work 12 hours a day, because schools is going to take up that amount of time. This lack of support from the population and the government, I think, is the reason that the movement is foundering right now. Some of the numbers are down a little bit, and it's why the glass ceiling hasn't yet cracked open. A lot of women, I covered business stories, a lot of women have been invited to crack the ceiling, and they say no, because they simply can't do it with families. So no one's answered the question, which is who's going to nurture the children?
I think Linda put the nail on the head on the nail. Affordable childcare just isn't there. My younger son has disabilities, and many of his caretakers make between $8 and $10 an hour and try to raise children. And you know, I was fortunate. By the time I had children, I could afford good daycare. I could afford a live-in. I could afford what I needed to have. That's not true for so many women. And single fathers, I'm not just talking about women, so many families that just do not have affordable childcare that's reliable, that's safe, and I think it's a big problem. Equal pay, of course, is a problem. Sheila, what's the number, 79 or something? Family leave, as Lyndon pointed out, 12 weeks. All right, that's better than getting fired, but it's still not great. I mean, 12 weeks, it just isn't good enough. I also hope that we are encouraging young women. As Marilyn has pointed out, there was a lack of mentoring when we all went through what we did. We often didn't know another physician and lawyer or a journalist that was a female. I hope that has changed to encourage young women that they can do what they want as far as a profession, a career, a vocation. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever they choose, and hopefully to still have relationships in a family. Because, you know, in retrospect, I'm really glad I had those kids.
I'm glad you asked the question, Paula, about what has been accomplished. I put it into 4 words, all beginning with A. Access to fields, yes. Women, in almost all fields, women have done well and are able to go to all of the schools they want to go to and enter the fields they want to go to. There's a few exceptions. Acceptance of the presence of women and the worth of women, I really think is pretty good, especially among people in the workforce. I think there's been a sea change. It's, again, not complete. Advancement, not so good. Let me look at med schools with you. The entering class this year was 22,055, 48% women. It was the first year that women made up more than 20,000 entering the medical schools in the country. But when it comes to advancement, 35% of women are on medical school faculty, 42% of those are assistant professors, 31 associate, 19 full. There are only 13% deans in American medical schools. Law school is 22%. Business school, as we might expect, is 14%. When I was in my early years in my career, there were no women deans, and I actually knew a personal friend of mine was appointed the first woman dean in America. And she did pretty well for 2 years. Then she sadly got breast cancer and was fired. And so, you know, the one step forward, one step backward thing still pertains. But there's another A beside access, acceptance, and advancement. And that's we have to do something about the abatement of the double burden of women when it comes to children. We really have to look at, as a people, collectively, what do we do about children? That problem has not been solved. It wasn't solved in the Soviet Union years ago. It hasn't been solved here. And that's a biggie. There are some improvements now. Men are helping much more, including my son, who stays home during the day because he's a musician. While his wife goes to work, he's doing the primary child care. So men are coming up to the plate. However, we still have the problem of parental leave, child care, flexibility, and there's a biggie here too. We don't pay child care workers enough. We don't value them. Same with teachers, but I'm talking about early care at the moment. And I think that is, again, a policy and a societal issue that we have to address. I'll stop here.
Well, let's not stop. Let's open the floor to questions. Questions of these, and actually, another wife, mother, and professional woman too. What I'm going to do is walk the mic around.
Hello. Hello.
You're there.
I don't know what your name is.
Marilyn.
Marilyn. I think you made the most penetrating comment when you said that the people in policy, etc., still look on women as the 1940 model. And I wish you would elaborate. It just really hit home as a real problem that nobody ever talks about in those terms. And I wish you would elaborate on that comment.
Well, if you look at what's happening in the state of Arizona right now in terms of cutting funds in education, you can take any example you want, but it's as though the things that we have to value because it's our future. Children are our future. We have to pay attention not just to our own, but to the community of children. We're not doing very well with paying attention to the community of children. I was being somewhat sarcastic when I said that because I don't really know what goes on in legislators' heads. I'm not sure I want to at this point. But it seemed to me that when you vote against child care or education or early childhood education, you're voting against your own interests for your own future of your family and the community. So that's what I was driving at.
Thank you.
What can we do to make it possible for more women to be in the Congress so that we can change some of these things? I don't even know exactly what the statistics are, but I know that it's way beyond. Do you know what it is? It's way.
Yeah, I have an
it should be
article.
50%, and you know, we need to find a way to do this.
I clipped an article on this. It said Congress has more women and minorities than ever. I did this right after the election, but the number of female lawmakers is up slightly from 100 at the close of the last Congress, but represents about 20% of the total. So it's far less than the 51% of people in the United States. And it's a lot less than many other countries. The U.S. doesn't rank very highly. I don't know what to do about it because I don't know anything about politics, so I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
I mean, one problem I see, again, gets back to having a family life. If you look at our state legislators, they have to be in Phoenix 4 or 5, 6 months a year. If you live in Tucson, what's your support system if you have children? People in Congress in DC, I mean, they're in DC during the week, they fly back to their states on the weekend. It's a pretty tough, grueling life. And it would be very difficult, I think, for somebody with young children if they don't have a very good support system, either in a spouse, family. I mean, look at the President of the United States. He moved in his mother-in-law. I mean, if you think about it, that was a great solution. But how many people are able to do something like that? So it goes from the top down, getting back to what Marilyn said, we have to have the supportive community in order to succeed at any level. And again, not just for women, but for people like the President of the United States.
Let me just say, can I just say one thing? It isn't just women. Because we also have to somehow convince the men out there who are still in the majority, and maybe for a long time, just because of the demographics. I think we have to convince the men, and I don't think we're doing I don't think we're doing too well at this point in time. I think we have to talk about the future. Everybody seems stuck on today, balancing the budget today. Let's look at what's going to happen in the future.
I like your comments about the 4 A's. I'd like to bring up another one. Attrition, career truncation. For whatever reasons, and you've talked about a lot of the reasons, are there any numbers on the lifetime of a career for women versus men? Because this affects achieving high-level positions like a dean or a presidency of a corporation, whatever it might be. And at every step in the organizational hierarchy, I think that would affect it. Do we know what's happening, what's going on with the lifetime of careers and career attrition?
It's interesting that you asked me that question because I actually did a study called the Detroit Women Physicians Study back in the 70s. And we interviewed 100 women physicians, 100 men physicians, and 100 women who lived 3 doors down to the right, I believe, from the women physicians, because we had male doctors, women doctors, and we wanted to have a control for the women that were not, most of them were non-professional in the 70s if they weren't doctors. It was not a perfect study, but we found that if you took illness in men and who took early retirement and women who left to raise their children, there wasn't that much difference. There was a higher rate, but it wasn't as high as one might think. Today it's very complicated because women tend to leave, some women leave the workforce and then come back later. So I don't know, that's a little trickier to count. But I think the real problem is, again, it goes back to who raises the children and how well do we do it. And when we solve that problem, I think all of the careers will find it easier.
Thank you. I found this very illuminating and very helpful. And some of those barriers are definitely still there. One of the things I wanted to say, it's more than talking about men and women and how they work together and raise children. I think part of it is the expectation around work. Right now, if you're in a professional occupation, there's an expectation that you spend 12 hours of a day. And I think this is a relatively recent development. And I think we also need to look at what are the expectations around working people. Why is there kind of a moral imperative to be at work 12 hours a day, and feel guilty if you're not. I think this is a larger infrastructure issue.
I wanted to thank you all for your comments. They're quite, what's the right word, good reminders and wonderful stories. Motivational for many of us in a slightly different phase. I actually wanted to ask the two of you, since this is a collaboration, something about your choice for music and your thinking about that in the context of today's event.
I chose the music because, first of all, Libby Larsen is well known as a composer, period. Not just, she happens to be a woman. And also because the poetry, this cycle is called Love Since 1950. And to a certain extent, the theme, it's sort of back a bit. But in spite of that, if you look at the poetry and the settings of it, they are, first of all, they emulate popular song. And they deal with frustrations, empowerment, our own opinions, like them or not. And that's why I chose the music. And actually, I only know about this music because Kristen and I performed it first, I guess, about 2 years ago. And it always sort of stuck with me. The other reason that it came back to me is that I was in an airport. And I found a book, and it was by Gail Davis, and it was called When Everything Changed. And that's when I do most of my reading on planes. And I said, oh, okay, I think this will work. But this was essentially the frame to the idea of hearing women's voices of all kinds.
And I'd just like to add to that and say that when I first found the song cycle, I sing lots of music, and often there's a female character. I can just speak of it. Often there's a female character that is the prevailing character within the storyline, but very often they are poems by men, and they're set by men, and they're from a very, very different time. And what I like about these songs is that they reflect kind of the rawness of reality as opposed to the prettied up version of what things should be, and still often are not settled. When I had my daughter at age 35, I was the first female in the School of Music to have a child who was on tenure track. And that's not that long ago, she's 6.
Wow.
I'm very fascinated by the emphasis on children and the strides and differences that are necessary because of children and the impact that children has on women in the workplace. As a gerontologist, I am very disappointed in the fact that no one has talked about the sandwich generation and the number of people in the workforce who are not only taking care of children, but are also taking care of their aged parents. So for example, 1 in 8 people aged 40 to 60 in the workforce is currently not only rearing a child, but taking care of an aging parent. Do any of you on the panel want to speak to that issue?
Well, it's an excellent point. It is part of the reason why I retired at 58, because both of my parents were demented at that point. My father had Alzheimer's, my mother had transient ischemic attacks, and they were going downhill together. And they lived across the country from me, and so I had a lot of decisions to make. And the combination of raising a single child, being a single mother, and having 2 sick parents who were very irrational with me at that time. Well, I need to say no more. I feel my heart goes out to all those, to the sandwich generation.
I would have to agree. I was under different circumstances. My father passed away before I even went to law school, and my mother passed away 1 month before I finished. So I only had one generation really to work with, though as I got older I did help a maiden aunt and ran back and forth to Florida to help her as she aged. So you're right, it is a big problem. Again, I think it's a tougher problem for people that do not have the money to have good care for the children and the aging family members.
And we'll finish with you.
Good morning, thank you. I'm a kind of a ringer, so I'm cheating here. I do bankruptcies for a living as an attorney in Tucson, and I will tell you that these issues involving costs are a huge part of why I have clients, because the working class people you talked about, they're having their parents and grandparents do this informally all over the place. And at the same time, while that's happening, they're also caring for elderly relatives. It drives my practice. It is a generational, institutional, and governmental issue that we have to get on top of. And also, when you're talking about working class folks, I think the difference in the success rate of women in the professional field compared to working class progress is not the same. And maybe we can get some comment about that just quickly. But again, these issues are driving people into my office.
There's two things I really worry about, beside everything else we've talked about. And that is that young women and girls today think the battle is won. It's not. So that worries me. And I think we have to think about mentoring and reaching out to the young teenagers in our culture. And then the worst thing of all, that I actually wake up at night and think about it, is young women today, too many of them are making bad choices. They're choosing not to marry. They may be in a relationship, they may be having babies, the relationship cracks and then or crumbles, and then there's a woman who's a single mom and doesn't have the money to go back to school and has to raise this child working at McDonald's. That is a nightmare. And just in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, 10% of the children born to college graduates grow up in single-parent households. 70% of the children born to high school and below grow up in single-parent households. This is some sort of social emergency. I don't want to get moralistic. I don't want to do what Jeb Bush said, I'm quoting him, poor women should get their life together and find a husband. Last week, by the way. But the point is that we have to really look at this issue because the fabric of our entire society is pulling apart. Thank you for bringing it up.
all the women's voices here. Kristen Dauphiné, my partner in crime, Linda Grant, Susan Freund, Marilyn Hines. Thank you very much for cheering.